Bienvenidos a Paréntesis, el espacio donde abrimos un paréntesis en la rutina para conversar con quienes escriben, leen y piensan en la literatura. Hoy es un episodio muy especial porque tengo el honor de conversar con uno de los autores de ciencia ficción más influyentes de la última década, Pierce Brown, el creador del universo de Red Rising o Amanecer Rojo. Pierce, thank you so much for joining me today on Paréntesis. It's truly an honor to have you here. Your books have left a deep mark on readers all over the world, including Latin America, and I'm incredibly excited to welcome you to the podcast.
Wow, that's quite an introduction. Thanks for having me. What questions can I answer for you?
Okay, first off, for those who haven't yet jumped into the world of Red Rising, how would you describe the series as a whole? What kind of experience can they expect when they pick up one of your books?
Oh gosh, there's a couple ways of doing that. One, I could give the old Hollywood elevator pitch, which is Game of Thrones meets Star Wars on steroids and cocaine. But for a little bit longer of an explanation, it's said about 1,000 years from now, where humanity has spread throughout the solar system and colonized the world, they have split humanity into 14 different castes. And these different castes create a rigid hierarchical structure where you are born to your vocation and you are genetically modified in order to be better at your vocation based on the caste you're in, and that's typified by 14 different colors. It's created some friction within the colors. At the bottom of this society, you have the manual laborers, the reds, who are seen as a disposable workforce. At the top, you have the golds, who fancy themselves to be the peak of human evolution and were initially created to be shepherds of humanity, to shepherd us out of the chaos of our modern world, and to be a post-racial, post-religious society dedicated to expanding the empire of man, so to speak. But unfortunately, along the way, they have lost their way, and perhaps are no longer shepherds as much as tyrants. The story follows Darrow, a red, who has an issue with the class system. That
Love that
summarizes it. I mean,
description.
you've read the books, you know.
Yeah, no, I love that
Totally.
description. I think that really captures what makes the series stand out. It's so complex. It's much more than just action and rebellion. There's this like emotional core, this intensity that sneaks up on you. I remember when I first picked up the first book, I picked it up thinking it would be like a small, fun sci-fi read. And suddenly I was like emotionally invested, questioning power structures and staying up way too late, flipping the pages. But let's go back to the beginning. What inspired you to write Red Rising? Was it a story you'd been carrying with you for a while, or was it something that struck more suddenly?
Great question. I think that along the way, you'll find that it was with you the whole time, but in its inception, it was something that came somewhat out of like a lightning bolt out of a blue sky. I had been reading Antigone, an ancient Greek play by Sophocles. It's a 2,500-year-old play where a woman chooses to die for her beliefs, where she has two brothers who are part of a civil war, and one of them had died and lost in the civil war, and she believed in burying her ancestor, burying her brother, and the ruler of that society wouldn't let her. But the Greeks believed that it was important because if you couldn't bury the body, the soul could not go on to the afterlife. And so she decided it was worth dying for. And her message echoed to me through time, and I thought about the other characters in her story and how their lives would move on afterwards. And so I think that it was a combination of that. And I was also doing a mountain climb with some friends, and I was suffering. I was exhausted. So I'd been reading Antigone, then I was doing a mountain climb with friends, and I was exhausted and just wishing the gravity was less. So I wish I had these grab boots that would fly me to the top of the mountain. And somehow those two things collided. This, 2,500-year-old story, along with wish fulfillment of the future. And then I think that there's many other influences along the way. For instance, I didn't know the tone of Red Rising. I didn't even know it was going to be a thing until I was reading a botany book that I'd bought. It was this like 18th, 19th century botany book, and it had a flower called Haimanthus in it. And I read that Haimanthus means blood blossom in Latin. And I thought that was such a compelling definition that I wrote. There was a flower that grows on Mars. It is red, harsh, and fit for our soil. It is called Haimanthus. It means blood blossom. And from that, the tone of Red Rising was born, and I started writing pretty immediately after that.
Since you're talking about Red Rising, I've heard readers say that the tone of Red Rising, the first book, is quite different from the rest of the saga. Do you agree with it? Was it an evolution that was planned from the start, or did it kind of unfold naturally?
Oh, it's a great question because I was 22 when I wrote it, so inevitably I will change as a writer. Now I'm 37. So I'm going to have a different voice. I'm going to learn new things. My worldview is going to change. But also, I was trying to reflect the mentality of my protagonist. I write first person immediate tense, right? So I'm writing from the perspective of a 16-year-old miner on Mars who's never seen the sun, who lives in a patriarchal society, which is very codified, based on sex, based on class, based on job. And so I thought my job was to write from his perspective, not write from my perspective. And I always think that's the writer's job. And so, writing from that first person tense, as Darrow's world was very small, so too was his perception. So too was his worldview. And so, Red Rising is naturally going to be different because I won't ruin it for readers, but as the books expand, he encounters more of the world. And a lot of his foundational myths are changed. A lot of his cultural biases are changed. A lot of his gender biases are changed. Many things in his life change. In fact, everything changes. And I think that the later books reflect that. But then I'm also taken back to why I wrote Red Rising. I'd written 6 books beforehand, and I'd had no luck. So when I was 18, I fell in love with writing. I didn't really know it was possible until then. And I wrote 6 books, none of which were apparently very good because I couldn't even get an agent. And I was so sick of facing rejection and trying to write these big, I don't know, 1,000-word books and couldn't get anyone to represent me. So I looked at what was popular and I thought, okay, so if I want to tell a space opera, which no one is buying right now, then I have to dress it up in a different way. And so Red Rising, to me, in many ways, was finding the how to say it. It was built to be accepted based on what was successful at the time, and they were buying a lot of teen versus the system things. Divergent, Hunger Games were very popular, but I also knew I had to make it my own. And so, having faced rejection for 6 books that had not been listening to the market, I was finally started to listen to the market on that one. But then in Golden Sun, once I had permission from the market, once I had a platform, I really got to take it in the direction I wanted to go along. Which is not to say I'm not proud of Red Rising. I am. But it's also crazy what you write when you're 22, and then you reread it when you're 37, and you're like, oh, yo.
I think, as you said, Red Rising as a whole has grown throughout the years. The success of the series has grown throughout the years as well. But when you started writing the series, did you ever imagine it would grow into such a massive saga with such a devoted fan base? Was there a moment when you realized, whoa, this is much bigger than I expected?
I'd say incrementally. I certainly had hopes that it would be. I think that there's a certain power in the movies, say, for instance, of the 80s and the 90s. Look at Amblin, like the Spielberg movies. I think he did a great job in writing and directing movies that were sometimes about children, not always, but sometimes about children, yet had universal themes that never talked down to the audience. And so I wanted that universality in Red Rising, but I also knew that I wanted to deliver it in a very kind of rough mechanism. And Darrow is a very rough mechanism. He's a dick, in the first book, he's overconfident, he's rude, he has a small worldview, he's many things that are flawed. He also writes in these very short, jagged sentences, and it's very abrupt. And it's there were 28 agents who didn't want Red Rising, and then there was one who said, I see what you're trying to do here. And so I think that more so, yeah, it was designed to be universal, yet at the same time, I knew I was doing it in an aggressive, weird way, I guess. So I was relieved more than anything when I received good reception for the first book, and then baffled completely when people started naming their kids after characters. Baffled when people started getting tattoos on their necks, on their arms. A young man one time came up to me at a coffee shop, and he said he recognized my dog, not me, and introduced himself and said his name was Severo. And I was like, I squinted at him, like, your name can't be Severo. No one's named Severo. Well, it turns out he'd just gone to the DMV in California that day and legally changed his name to Severo X
Wow.
because he wanted a new name to go with their new identity. And I felt incredibly just flabbergasted by that. And those are the things that really change it when you see that long after the story is told. I know I can entertain people with the book. Very happy about that. But the fact that it's carried into their lives after they're done reading is remarkable to me. So I've count myself very lucky.
I've seen that fan communities can be a little intense in the best of ways.
It
And
can be.
it's amazing to hear that you have great fan interactions and memories that have stayed with you. I mean, it must be amazing to see people creating fan art, theories, and cosplays inspired by your stories.
And I enjoy the cosplay. I enjoy the fan art. But the things that really touch me are the ones where in dark moments people found the books. I find a lot of people send me messages when they're undergoing chemotherapy or after the death of a loved one, or perhaps have a loved one on their sickbed and are with them and reading the books and sharing that with them. And that to me is remarkable when someone can seek something that is inherently dark. My books are very dark, yet they find the light, which is what I'm promising in the books, what I'm guiding people towards, hopefully, if I do my job well, but that they're finding the thing that keeps me going. That's something that, I don't take for granted at all. At the same time, cosplay is really cool.
Yeah, I've seen some pretty cool cosplays of Red Rising.
Mhm.
And I have to say, bringing it back to fans, but combined with your writing process, I'm one of those people who loves deep diving into fan theories whenever I'm reading a series I'm obsessed with.
Yeah.
Readers can really be so creative and they pick up on the tiniest details that make you rethink everything. So
Hmm.
has a fan theory ever made you stop and think, wait, that's actually a great idea? Has it ever influenced your
Oh yeah,
writing?
entirely. Which is why I have to stop listening to damn fan theories now. Now that I'm writing the seventh book, it's the last one. I'm like, no, this has to be the way I started it, which is not listening to anyone. Because definitely, there was a period, like I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, where I'd pop on Reddit and like just lurk around a little bit, and then I realized I can't do that. It's kind of like, honestly, like being exposing yourself to that stuff is. You ever play that game as a kid where you're talking about which superpower you'd have?
Yeah,
What's the one as a kid where a lot of people wanted it, but now that you're an adult, you would think is the worst thing possible?
reading people's minds,
Exactly.
maybe.
You
Yeah.
don't want to be able to read people's minds. Ignorance is bliss. And I think it's the same thing for anyone who Googles themselves, anyone who looks at their, Reddit stuff or reads their reviews. Like I can't read reviews. I find it like sometimes they were so spot on. It's like there would be posts like guessing I don't know, this was during Iron Gold or Dark Age, and they were like going fan theories on stuff, and there were completely ridiculous ones, but just absurd. But then there was like one that had no likes that was spot on. It was like said 15 things that I was going to do, and I'm like, what is happening? I try not to
Did
because
they get into my notes?
they got into my notes, or it was my editor just trolling me. I don't know what happened, but I certainly think that it has a big impact. What I think that has a bigger impact, however, is the relationship I have with fans, the implicit promise I have with fans in order to. I want to create books that feel complete in and of themselves, but are part of a larger tapestry. Yet at the same time, I want to create something because I need to be entertained too. I want to create something that is new and feels new in the Red Rising world, but not at the cost of anything that came before. So I can't make any decisions that make the rest of the series feel irrelevant or for naught. For instance, I think that, particularly the latest Star Wars films and other sequels over time made people feel some sort of way about the original things. And so my great duty is to honor the commitment the fans have made to me, which is giving me chunks of their life, spending it on my stuff, to honor the relationship they have with Red Rising, not by giving them what they want, but by trying to give them something that is earnest to the books and feels real and right to me. It's why these later books have taken me a lot longer than the first ones have, simply because I have colossal physical feeling of like nausea when something doesn't work in a book and I can't figure out why. And I don't want to do any half beats. I want it to work completely for me. So I think that the fan feedback more so is trying to maintain respect for the story in the same way they do.
I love that you're focusing on keeping the essence of the story alive. I know you have a lot of very, very passionate fans, including myself.
Mhm.
And I think that part of that passion comes from how deeply us as readers connect to your characters.
Mhm.
The series is filled with unforgettable characters, some characters we love, some characters we fear, and some characters we love to hate. Do you identify yourself with one of the characters, or maybe do you have a character that was inspired by someone you know?
I'd say on the whole that each one of these characters is some fragment of my soul. In order for me to reflect empathy towards them, I have to be able to see the world through their eyes and also understand how they're perhaps deficient. Either their worldview is broken, or they had something happen to them, or simply, well, for whatever reason. I have to be able to see the world through their eyes. And so I think that any author who pretends that characters are not a part, like a fraction of them, isn't looking into it deep enough. And then I make them up, of course, right? But remember, like Cassius, Darrow, Severo, blah, 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 they all came from weirdly enough, they all came from me. I don't know how, but, and sometimes it's shocking that they did, right? And
Yeah,
so,
parts of you, yeah.
and as a reader, it's incredible the ownership you can feel, right? And then also the potentiality for anger at me if I do something with those characters that you feel is incongruous with that character, right? If Mike, like Danny at the end of Game of Thrones, right? And deciding to go insane. And so you take a character who, if that was the eventual goal and they'd led up to it, you felt it all along the way, that's one thing. But if you throw that in at the end, perhaps it makes people who looked up to Danny as a role model or as evidence that there's a strong type of character like that they really resonated with in fiction. But then you pull the rug out from under them and just have them go crazy at the end and kill everyone. That's a violation, right? Because you feel like that's incongruous with who they are and that you haven't been led there with the story properly, right? And so, in many ways, I have that same kind of like emotional tether to these characters. I don't want them to do something that wasn't them, that isn't them, because it feels like it violates something in me as well. So I'd say there's an aspect of all these characters within me, and there's an aspect of me within all these characters. The ones that I relate the most to are sometimes the most difficult to write. When I was starting off as a 22 and I was having a hard time cutting my way in the world and just working a bunch of odd jobs, it was very easy to feel like Darrow. And I think Darrow, I very much felt that he was my vessel for a little bit of it. But then as I started getting to the other characters, I realized there's a lot of Sepro in me as well. There's a lot of Victor in me as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that the one that reflected me the most at the onset was Darrow. Then perhaps in the end, I'd say it's a bit of a split. Severo will always have part of my heart. I think if the books were not successful, I would be totally Severo at this point. But the books being successful has taught me a lot of lessons as well. And so it's also, let that inner goblin recede a little bit.
Overall, I think that characters are very layered, very complex. They have a lot of depth. There's a lot of characters, and each one feels like very complete. Every decision they make, it feels very true to them. And that's something that I really like about how you write. I'm not a writer, but I imagine that's kind of maybe hard to follow through so many books.
It can be. It can be. My last drafts are always making sure that's the case. For each book, I write down what I really try to look at is what does this character want, and what prevents this character from getting it in two different ways. What prevents them from getting it in a physical way, like a plot-wise way, and what within them is inherently contradictory towards getting their thing. Right? Say Darrow, he wants peace, but he has to bring war. That's an internal contradiction. Virginia, she wants everyone to not need her, yet doesn't want control, but she's having to take control because everyone is making bad decisions. So those are very simple ways of describing kind of what I try to do for each character. Severo, in the later books, wants to go be a dad, yet he's also honor bound to be a dad to the legions. But it actually tracks the entire way. Why does Severo develop these, how do I say it, unseemly characteristics? Like, why is he so dirty? Why does he smell so bad? Why is he so mean? Why does he wear his hair like a mohawk? Well, it's true. He's so afraid of rejection and so used to rejection that he wants to reject the world before it can reject him yet again. And so he's been conditioned to being rejected. And so he's created this, this artificial construct around him of savagery. Yet, as soon as he has a family, that's not rejection. That's the ultimate acceptance,
Yeah.
And so as soon as he has that, of course he was looking for that the whole time. What would he do to protect that,
I think those characters are shaped by the world that surrounds them. In Red Rising, that world is massive and very complex. I've always been fascinated by the color hierarchy and the political structure that you built. What inspired that world building? Were you inspired by real world systems or events? What kind of shaped those ideas?
No modern events. I was inspired mostly by Plato's Republic, which again is a 2,500-year-old book. And in Plato's Republic, it's simply a dialectic where they're using a mechanism where one philosopher is making a statement, and then several other philosophers are disagreeing. And in Plato's Republic, the argument is basically, or the discussion is about what would make the best society. What is the best ruling form of government for a city-state? And they're going through all the problems with all of the forms of governance and all the forms of political structure. And they arrive at the conclusion of the best form of society being one of philosopher kings, where philosopher kings who are taken from any upbringing, but as long as they have gold within them, ability to become a philosopher king. They come from any upbringing, and they're trained in mathematics, humanities, war, etc. And this group of individuals then rules the society. But the key point of them being it's completely meritocratic, and they believe that men of the field or those made of iron, I think, should till the fields. Those made of bronze should be men of war, etc. So there's this concept of meritocracy based on your calling, that you should be able to come from every part of life. But then I looked at that and I was reading it as someone who has had a bit more privilege than Plato did, about 2,500 years of history, and seeing made my own conclusions of what every form of government becomes. And it seems to me that every form of government becomes plutocracy of wealth, which means few rich people rule everything. Even if you look at a totalitarian society or like a autocratic society that's like modern Russia, modern Russia is a combination of a few rich individuals and Vladimir Putin. Without those rich individuals, Vladimir Putin is not in office. And so, but if you look at America, America wears different clothes and has more fairness, I would argue, than Russia, quite a bit more, yet at the same time is heavily influenced by the plutocratic class, by the rich. And so to me, even socialism, when we've seen, or communism, every time we've had communism, to a big degree, it has been ruled by a small group of individuals. And so it seems to me that no matter what form of government we have, it always ends up being the same. And I thought the same thing would happen to this ideal form of government, this meritocracy that was created by Plato. And as a student of history, or a fan of history rather, I see these things as always being true. I think you can see them in almost every society. And I think as an author, I'm far more interested in talking about things that perhaps have always been true, general trends, than I am, say, lambasting Donald Trump. I think that it's far more interesting for me to point out something that might be true about humanity as opposed to, scoring easy points and criticizing someone nowadays. But I also think that that gives hopefully a louder megaphone for me to be able to talk about issues with hopefully not being pulled into the right or wrong of today. Because the whole thing is that these conflicts, no matter how specific, exist now, have always existed, perhaps in a different format, perhaps with different parties, but they've always existed. And looking at that is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Like they say, history repeats itself. You seem very inspired by history and old books. And I think you can see that in Red Rising. You can see that kind of merging from the old and the new. You can see that in your writing, in the tone of the story. As a whole, the world you've built is very, very immersive. And honestly, reading the series for me, it felt almost like watching something. It felt like a movie playing in my head.
Mm.
That brings me to something I've been wanting to ask.
Wonder what this could be about.
The night I sent you the interview request, I was watching Interstellar, the movie. That's one of my favorite movies
So
ever
good,
made.
isn't it?
Yeah. And all I could think was, I need Red Rising to be on screen.
You and me
I
both. You and
I
me
know
both.
you've said
Yeah.
maybe something is in the works, but I don't know if you have any kind of update or at least give us like a general sense of where that project stands.
Sure. Well, unfortunately, the thing that was in the works for quite a long time is no longer in the works. Unfortunately, I have to sign contracts where I can't say things very
Yeah.
explicitly, but that thing is no longer in the works. However, I think I will very soon have something in the works, and I think that that thing failing has prepared this thing to succeed. So again, no news. I feel bad because like I get asked this all the time, and I've asked this for 5 years, and like I'm an optimistic guy, so I'm thinking it's always going to work out, even though I'm reasonable, but I always think it's going to work out, and then for some reason it doesn't. So no promises, but I think we'll have something interesting soon.
We're
But
going
I'll
to be
put that back
hoping
in
that
the show.
happens
So.
sometime soon. Is there a specific scene or book or moment that you need to be done right
Oh,
if
I
it
need,
comes to that?
yeah, I need to see an Iron Rain.
Oh,
I need to see the gala scene. I think the gala scene or the gala scene would be incredible to
yeah.
incredible confluence of character arcs, emotion, tension, a lot of things going on. I'd also love to see Darrow reuniting with his mother in that one scene in Golden Sun. It'd be really beautiful. Um, Quite a few things.
Is there something that scares you about making a
Oh yeah,
adaptation?
oh yeah, yeah. I'm no longer in control. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Unless I'm the one writing the check, I'm not in control. So of
That's
course,
right.
yeah. And also rebottling magic is difficult. So there's even though there's things I would change about Red Rising now and change about every book, in some way it's bottled lightning. And so trying to bottle the same lightning in the same way is always going to be impossible. And so hoping that something isn't lost in the translation, not so much the fidelity to the story, but fidelity to the tone. Because I'd hate for it to be so excited about it, and for fans to be so excited about it, for it to come out and not feel like theirs, not feel like something that represents what the emotions they felt when they first read. And I've had that sort of alienation from books where I was quite the fan and quite the reader, and then the movie comes out, and I felt as though it was something completely different. And I would hate for that to be the case. So
Yeah.
I have that great fear. Yeah. Also, my fans are pretty civilized right now, pretty respectful. And if it became a big film or something, I'd worry. I'd worry. I mean,
And
yeah,
honestly, I think the reason I feel so strongly about seeing it adapted on screen is because I've truly loved every book in the
yeah.
series for different reasons. I think that each book has its own rhythm and its own purpose. The fan favorite tends to be Golden Sun. For me, it's either Morning Star because it has some amazing twist, and Dark Age because it's so chaotic.
Uh-huh.
But for you, do you have a favorite? One you're maybe the most proud of?
Certainly each in their own way. Red Rising's the most nostalgic. Golden Sun, I can't believe I pulled it off because I think it's a really sharp book. Like I think it's
Yeah.
just so fast. I don't disagree with any of my decisions in it. I think that certain books like Dark Age, there's certain things that I would do a bit differently. Yet Dark Age, I'm also really proud of, and I think that might be my favorite because it is so crazy.
Yeah.
And it's the only book I wrote without the editor that I've had on all my other books. I wrote that one kind of like in solitude, and it's just crazy because of it, you know. And also that the first 100 pages going back and forth between Darrow and Lysander, I think is some of my favorite writing I've ever done.
It feels like very raw, chaotic, like very emotional.
And I'd also never seen that structure done that way before. There's chapters start kind of long, and then they get shorter and shorter as they get closer together, and then they finally overlap. And they do it in such a way that
Yeah.
I just cackled when I wrote it, and so
Yeah.
that was a lot of fun. But
It
then like
scarred me emotionally, but it's still one of my favorites.
and I think that's part of the reason because it's like it created such high intensity emotions that you're just like, I remember where I was when I was reading that.
Yeah.
But I think that Lightbringer also has a special place in my heart because I had to. Well, Iron Gold too. They all do, but Iron Gold because I knew that readers were going to be frustrated by it, and I was also learning something. So I was learning how to balance multiple POVs, which I do a bit differently now. But also I knew that they'd be frustrated by the POVs I chose because all the three of those POVs have reason to be upset at our main character,
Yeah.
and because of that, people are not going to like them initially, but then making or earning that love or that respect at least from people in their writing, I knew it'd be really rewarding in the long run because it faced some adversity early on from fans and from readers. I feel as though I'm very happy about it because I feel as though the intentions of it worked out in the end. And for a while, I was worried they wouldn't. Um, Iron Gold in many ways, you don't have Dark Age without Iron Gold because
Yeah.
Iron Gold is all about collecting the gunpowder, and Dark Age is about blowing it up, and then Lightbringer is about picking up the pieces.
Some pieces.
Some pieces.
It's bittersweet to know we're almost at the end of that journey. With Red God in the Horizon, there's this kind of sense that everything's coming full circle. And I know you can't reveal much, but is there anything you can tease about Red God or what we can expect in Red God?
I'm really excited when Darrow wakes up and we find out that this entire thing was a fever dream and he's been in a coma because he was a bike messenger in San Francisco and got hit by a car.
That would be a plot twist.
Very excited about that reveal. Can't wait. Can't wait for the feedback. Nah, I don't want to ruin it, but I'm excited to see some reunions. I'm excited to see some grudges settled. Um, I'm still figuring out a lot of it, but I'm not very excited to say goodbye to these characters.
Yeah.
And I feel as though sometimes I drag my feet because of that, because they've been with me for the last 15 years, and have been a key component of my life. You know,
Yeah.
I don't
I
know
think
what I'll do when I'm driving if I'm not thinking about what's Darrow going to do next to get himself out of this hairy situation I created. Yeah.
I think we as readers need to brace ourselves. And honestly, there's just so much history with these characters, so much we've been through with them. And I believe that saying goodbye in any form is going to hit hard. How do you feel about closing this chapter of the Red Rising universe?
Emotional. terrified to do so, excited to do so, yet at the same time is probably equally terrified.
Yeah.
Excited to have new ground because at a certain point writing a series and also trying to maintain all these contiguous storylines and grudges and world building and whatnot, it becomes a bit more like I'm a steward than I am an explorer, and I've always enjoyed exploratory writing. And so I'm quite excited to entertain myself and to have fun again and create without having to worry about disappointing a reader. I think that I'm very mindful of disappointing readers, um, while at the same time not trying to do fan service, because I think that that's deleterious to the quality of a work. So, not having to respect the buy-in of 6 books that people have done for characters and being like, here's a new one. Hope you like it. If you don't,
Yeah.
you won't hate me. But if I mess up book 7, oh man, I'll never hear the end of it. I was a
Yeah,
great series until 7. Oh man, you betrayed me.
that's a
Cassius
lot
was,
of pressure.
yeah.
I was gonna ask what's next after Red God, but just last week you confirmed you're not done with the Red Rising universe. I
Yes,
was
also.
very excited to receive my Lit Escalade special edition books and with
Oh, you
it the
got some Light
newsletter.
Escalade.
I
Oh,
did,
good,
of
good.
course I did.
Covers.
Amazing. I love them. They're displayed on
Oh,
my bookshelves.
I am excited to continue the Red Rising world. Like I said, it'll be in a different medium because I don't want to write another Red Rising novel for a little while. I think I'll take some time off. I'd love to return to some characters or perhaps return to some time periods more so. Less so for characters, more so
Yeah.
for time periods.
That's what I was gonna ask. Are we looking at spin-offs, prequels, or something totally different?
Well, this is the story of a familiar character. I can't tell you whom because we'll be
Hmm.
releasing that soon. But it's a story of a familiar character. And it'll be fun to see the society from a different perspective from Darrow's. And I think that I want to pour my energies after Red God is finished into a different universe and find a new love, so to speak. And eventually we'll come back to Red Rising and write some more.
And could we expect a story that leans more into another genre, political thriller, mystery, or even romance?
Oh yeah, no, I'd love to try my hand at fantasy. It's always been my first love, and perhaps have some romance thrown in there. I've been kind of also really loving romantasy lately. So I think that and the romantasy wears a lot of the similar trappings of what I grew up on in terms of fantasy and sci, particularly fantasy elements. So it'd be pretty fun to do that.
That would be very exciting.
Oh, would you
And
read one?
yeah, of course I would.
I've been told my books don't have enough high enough spice level, so I'd love to challenge. I'd love to challenge it. Doesn't feel
I'd love to see you try.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, it doesn't. I don't think it works for Red Rising, so I've resisted the market urges to make them spicier because it
Yeah, I don't think it needs it.
doesn't feel
Yeah.
in character. I think Red Rising's more about like unrequited love and the agony of not having it realized for the reader is so powerful. And so Red Rising's kind of how to say the romance is not sexualized, but there is still romance.
And
Be
it's
fun
still
to try
very
some other.
emotional. Well, whatever comes next, we'll be cheering on you every step of the
I
way.
appreciate it. You might have to be you might have to be a test reader for me because I
Oh
feel as
yeah, sign me
though
up.
I'm gonna need a few test readers. Yeah,
Sign me up for sure.
great.
Pierce, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. It's been a pleasure exploring your process and what lies ahead for Rising and for you as a writer. I know readers from all over are eagerly waiting Red God and whatever follows. Is there anything else you'd like to share, either with fans who followed this journey with you from the start or with new readers who might be about to enter this universe for the first time?
Oh, just a whole heaping of gratitude. Whether you've been with me from the start, just found the books, or are contemplating reading them, your time is precious, your attention is precious, your emotions are precious. Um, Particularly nowadays when there's so many options, that I could be an option or have been an option is absolute delight and honor. And I hope to live up to my end of the bargain and deliver to you good books. So thank you for reading and thanks for taking a chance on my stuff.
Thank you so much, Pierce. Y para todos los que nos escuchan desde Latinoamérica y más allá, gracias por acompañarnos en este episodio tan especial de Paréntesis. Si aún no han leído la saga de Red Rising o de Amanecer Rojo, este es el momento perfecto para empezar. Y si ya son parte de este universo, ustedes saben que lo mejor aún está por venir.